She was just a 17-year-old girl, mocked and ridiculed by the very people who were supposed to uphold justice. But Lily Turner wasn't about to let her age or lack of a law degree define her. When the courtroom laughed at her, she fought back with facts, determination, and an unwavering belief in what was right. Watch as this young genius takes on a fraudulent corporation, defies the odds, and proves that real strength comes from within. This is a story of courage, intellect, and a fight for justice that no one saw coming. Welcome to the Voices of the Underdog, where the underdog rises to show the world just what they're capable of. Lily Turner stepped into the courtroom with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her heart raced as she took in the towering walls lined with bookshelves filled with legal texts. This was it, the culmination of months of self-study, late-night reading sessions, and endless legal research. She adjusted her blazer, trying to appear more confident than she felt, and glanced at the seating area where her client, Mr. Johnson, sat anxiously awaiting her defense. At just 17 years old, Lily had been underestimated her whole life, but she had one thing many people didn't: drive. While most teens her age were out with friends, Lily had been studying legal books, attending online lectures, and even participating in mock trials to prepare for this moment. This case was a real test of her abilities, and she was determined to prove everyone wrong. But as she made her way to the defendant's table, the whispers and chuckles from the courtroom made her grip her notes a little tighter. It wasn't the first time Lily had been in a situation where her age worked against her, but there was something about the cold, professional air of the courtroom that made it all the more jarring. The judge, Joseph King, an older man with graying hair and an air of superiority, eyed her skeptically from the bench. He adjusted his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His gaze flicked over her, the subtle smirk on his face never quite leaving. He was a man who had presided over countless high-profile cases, and here was a teenager, barely out of high school, preparing to represent a man in a complex tax fraud lawsuit. "Miss Turner," Judge King said, his voice dripping with mockery, "I'm afraid you've wandered into the wrong courtroom. This is a serious case, not some school project. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Lily's cheeks flushed, but she stood tall, trying to gather her composure. "Your Honor, I am here to represent Mr. Johnson. I have reviewed all the documents, the evidence, and the legal precedents. I'm more than capable of handling this case." The judge let out a chuckle, his eyes flicking to the prosecutor, Olivia Stark, who sat with a smug smile on her face. Olivia was an experienced lawyer, known for her sharp wit and ability to dismantle her opponents. Lily had expected as much. She had seen the way the prosecution team had sneered at her when she walked in. They didn't think a teenager had what it took to stand up against them. And the judge, he seemed more interested in belittling her than actually considering her abilities. Judge King's laughter echoed through the courtroom as he leaned back in his chair. "I'm sorry, but you expect me to believe that a child like you is qualified to take on this case. You're not even old enough to vote, let alone practice law. I think we should have a recess while you call your teacher to explain why you're here." The audience in the courtroom snickered, and Lily felt her confidence start to waver. But she took a deep breath, refusing to let the judge's words shake her. She knew what she had prepared for. This case wasn't about her age. It was about proving that Mr. Johnson was innocent of the charges brought against him. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her notes on the table in front of her. She knew she had to push past the mockery and show them that she wasn't just some naive teenager. She was serious about defending her client. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her, "I understand that this case may be unconventional, but I assure you I have done my homework. I've studied the law. I've researched tax fraud cases, and I believe I have a strong argument to prove my client's innocence. I am ready to proceed." Judge King didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned to the prosecutor, Olivia Stark, and exchanged a look with her. Olivia, a woman in her late 30s with dark, sharply cut hair, gave a small, amused shrug before speaking. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, I think we're wasting valuable time here. This young woman doesn't have the legal qualifications to be standing here. She's just a kid pretending to play lawyer. How about we wrap this up and let a real attorney handle it?" Lily could feel the weight of Olivia's words. The prosecution was not just attacking her age, they were attacking her credibility. They wanted to discredit her before she had even begun. But Lily wasn't about to back down now. She had come too far, spent too many sleepless nights, and worked too hard to let their mockery derail her. Taking another deep breath, Lily spoke again, this time louder and with more conviction. "Miss Stark, if you think I don't belong here, I understand your skepticism. But I assure you I'm prepared to challenge your case. I have carefully analyzed the evidence and legal precedents. I'm here to represent my client with the same diligence and professionalism any seasoned attorney would." Olivia gave her a thin-lipped smile, as if humoring a child. "Very well, then. Proceed if you must, but don't waste our time with your antics." Lily ignored the sneer in Olivia's tone and focused on the case. She picked up the first document and began to explain her argument. She had studied Mr. Johnson's tax records in detail, and she knew exactly where the prosecution had made mistakes. Her opening statement was clear and concise, presenting facts and figures, using the same language she had read in the textbooks, and referencing case law that she had memorized. The judge didn't look impressed, but she could see some of the jurors beginning to pay attention. They weren't laughing now. As Lily continued her argument, she could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her. She knew that she had only one chance to prove herself. And even though Judge King and Olivia Stark continued to look down on her, she wasn't going to let that stop her. The courtroom was silent as Lily pressed on with her case, delivering her points with the confidence of someone much older than her years. She had spent so much time preparing for this day that it was impossible for her not to succeed. She wasn't going to let anyone, especially not the people who mocked her, define her abilities. And so, despite the mocking, despite the ridicule, Lily Turner began her defense. The battle for her credibility had just begun. The courtroom was still heavy with the tension from Lily's first words. Her heart raced as she stood alone at the defendant's table, her hands slightly trembling as she flipped through her notes. Despite the ridicule, Lily could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her. The whispers had subsided, but the skepticism was still palpable in the air. Judge Joseph King adjusted his glasses, staring at Lily with a mix of doubt and amusement. "Well, Miss Turner, if you're so certain, go ahead," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Let's see if you can back up those claims." Lily didn't flinch. Instead, she stood up straighter, her back as stiff as a board. She had prepared for moments like this, moments when everyone would doubt her abilities, when her age would be used against her. But none of that mattered now. She was here to defend Mr. Johnson, and she had a job to do. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin by addressing the core accusations brought against Mr. Johnson," Lily said, her voice firm but not too loud, just enough to command the attention of the courtroom. "The prosecution claims that Mr. Johnson has been involved in tax fraud, but the evidence they present is not only circumstantial, but it is also based on faulty assumptions and incomplete data." Lily paused for a moment to let her words settle in the room. She saw a few heads turn and the murmurings from the audience quiet down, though Judge King was still leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unmoving. But Lily couldn't let that discourage her. She had worked too hard, studied too much, to let their dismissal of her go unchallenged. She picked up the first piece of evidence, a series of financial statements that had been provided to the court. She had gone over these documents countless times, dissecting every figure, every transaction, every number that the prosecution had conveniently ignored. "Let me draw your attention to Exhibit A," she began, pointing to the financial records. "If we look at these statements from the past 2 years, we'll see that the alleged discrepancies, which are being touted as evidence of fraud, are actually the result of an internal accounting error within the company's finance department, not any willful act of deceit on the part of my client." A few spectators in the courtroom stirred, and Lily could feel the shift in the air. For the first time, some of the faces around the room were paying closer attention. Even the prosecutor, Olivia Stark, who had been sitting smugly behind her desk, narrowed her eyes at the evidence Lily was presenting. But the real challenge was Judge King, whose smirk never faltered. "What do you mean by internal error, Miss Turner?" Judge King asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Are you suggesting that your client didn't realize his company was misreporting its taxes? Sounds a bit far-fetched, don't you think?" Lily didn't hesitate. "I am suggesting that Mr. Johnson was unaware of the mistake, Your Honor. The error was made by an employee who was later fired after an internal audit discovered the discrepancies. In fact, Mr. Johnson has since implemented a new accounting system to ensure this sort of mistake never happens again." Lily's voice rang out with confidence, and this time, the judge didn't interrupt her. She continued, citing specific examples of legal precedents that mirrored the case at hand. She referenced case law where businesses had been found not guilty of fraud due to similar accounting errors that were not intentional acts of malfeasance. The longer she spoke, the more she felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. She could see the audience's shifting gaze from skepticism to intrigue. The whispers had stopped. Now, even some of the seasoned attorneys in the room were leaning forward, scribbling down notes. Judge King, still stoic, adjusted his position in the chair. He murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. But Lily didn't let up. She continued to present her case with clarity and precision, methodically addressing every point the prosecution had raised. With each argument, Lily highlighted inconsistencies in the prosecution's evidence, showing that the financial documents they relied on were incomplete and inaccurately interpreted. The more she spoke, the more the room seemed to take her seriously. "Your Honor," she said as she flipped to the next set of documents, "this is the missing link." The prosecution failed to acknowledge the contributions of Mr. Johnson's former employee, who had been responsible for the erroneous financial reports. Mr. Johnson was unaware of these errors until the internal audit was conducted. This is not fraud. This is a mistake. Olivia Stark shot a quick, sharp look at Lily, her expression souring as Lily continued to dismantle her case. "Objection, Your Honor," Olivia interjected, her voice filled with disdain. "This is nothing more than a weak defense for someone who is clearly guilty." Judge King raised his hand to silence her, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Stark, I'll allow Miss Turner to finish her presentation. Then we'll hear from you. Let's not interrupt the proceedings unnecessarily." Lily smiled inwardly, a small victory for her. She had earned Judge King's attention, and that was no small feat. She wasn't finished yet, though. She still had more to prove, and the true test was how she handled the prosecutor's cross-examination. She took a deep breath, cleared her throat, and moved on to the next part of her argument. The documents, the legal precedents, the case law, they all told the same story. Mr. Johnson was innocent. The prosecution's accusations were built on a shaky foundation of misinterpreted facts and incomplete evidence. The courtroom had started to change. The laughter and mockery that had greeted her when she first entered had all but vanished. Now, there was a sense of respect growing among the spectators. the lawyers, even the judge, as Lily's argument took shape before their eyes. As she wrapped up her presentation, Lily glanced over at Mr. Johnson. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, and for the first time that day, she felt a sense of calm. She had done everything she could to fight for his innocence, and she had done it with logic and poise. Now, all she could do was hope that the jury would see it as she did. "I rest my case, Your Honor," she said, standing tall, her voice steady and sure. The judge nodded slowly, clearly considering her argument. "Very well, Miss Turner," he said, his tone no longer mocking. "We'll take a short recess. When we return, we'll hear from the prosecution." As Lily sat back down, she could feel the weight of the moment sink in. The courtroom was different now. The atmosphere had shifted, and Lily Turner, despite all the odds, had managed to turn the tide in her favor. For the first time in this trial, Lily felt like she had a fighting chance. The courtroom buzzed with the usual murmur of conversations, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Lily Turner sat at the defendant's table, her hands resting firmly on the stack of documents she had meticulously prepared for this moment. She had laid out her argument with precision, explaining the flaws in the prosecution's case and providing irrefutable evidence of Mr. Johnson's innocence. Yet, despite her impressive presentation, Judge Joseph King and prosecutor Olivia Stark were still dismissing her with mocking glances, as if they hadn't yet realized the true force behind her arguments. Lily glanced across the room, noticing the smug expressions of both Judge King and Olivia Stark. They had no idea what she was capable of. She had proven her point with the evidence, but there was more she needed to do. It was time to let them see the truth. She had earned their attention, and now she would show them who she truly was. As Judge King glanced down at the papers in front of him, a chuckle escaped his lips. "Well, Miss Turner," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I must admit, your little argument has certainly been entertaining, but we're still talking about serious criminal charges here. I highly doubt your self-taught legal skills will hold up in the face of real legal expertise." Olivia Stark, sitting beside the judge, leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, a smug smile on her face. "Yes, Miss Turner, it's cute that you've spent your time reading law books, but this is not a high school project. You're playing in a league you can't possibly understand. This isn't some hobby." Lily clenched her jaw but remained calm, allowing the mockery to wash over her. She had heard worse. The worst part, though, was the disbelief, the belief that a young girl like her could never measure up. They thought they had her figured out, that they could dismiss her as just another naive teenager trying to play lawyer. But Lily wasn't here to play. She was here to win, and she would do whatever it took to prove them wrong. Taking a deep breath, Lily stood up, her voice steady but determined. She turned toward Judge King and Olivia Stark, who both looked at her with an air of superiority. "Your Honor, Miss Stark," Lily began, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "I understand that you might find it hard to believe that a 17-year-old girl without a formal law degree could stand in this courtroom, presenting a defense. But let me assure you, I am not here because of some delusion or desire to prove something. I am here because I have spent the last year studying law, not in a classroom, but from the textbooks, legal cases, and real-life situations that matter. I have learned from some of the best minds in the field, not in a law school, but by digging deep into cases, statutes, and precedent." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Lily could see the shift in the room. The laughter had died down, replaced by a stillness that enveloped the courtroom. For the first time, people were actually listening to her. They weren't laughing, they weren't mocking, they were waiting for her next words. Judge King, for the first time, didn't scoff. Instead, his gaze turned from amused to curious. "You're telling me," he said, his voice no longer dismissive, that you've spent the last year teaching yourself law, no formal education, no degrees. Lily nodded, her eyes unwavering. Yes, Your Honor, I may not have walked through the doors of a prestigious law school, but I've done something just as valuable. I've read case law, combed through legal texts, and analyzed every word I could find on the subject. I've spent countless hours studying not just theory, but real-world cases. And I've done this because I believe in the power of justice. I believe that anyone, regardless of their age or background, can stand up for what's right. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint rustling of papers and the low hum of the air conditioning. The spectators were no longer amused by Lily. They weren't doubting her abilities. Instead, they were realizing that this wasn't just a teenager making a fool of herself. This was a young woman who had put in the time, the effort, and the passion to understand the law, and she was proving it. Olivia Stark, who had been silent until now, scoffed. You expect us to believe that your little self-study session is enough to win a case like this? The evidence is clear, Miss Turner. Mr. Johnson is guilty. Your arguments might be cute, but they don't hold water. But Lily wasn't intimidated. Miss Stark, with all due respect, I believe the evidence is being misinterpreted. You see, I've spent the last year studying these kinds of cases, and I know exactly where the flaws lie. And the truth is, the prosecution's case is based on faulty assumptions, not facts. The mistake here wasn't made by Mr. Johnson. It was made by those who have failed to thoroughly investigate the matter. She continued, pointing to specific inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, highlighting the gaps in the evidence they presented, and showing where the financial documents had been misread. Her argument was clear, logical, and grounded in real-world law. She wasn't just some teenager with a few books. She was a sharp legal mind who had spent hours honing her skills, and it was finally paying off. Lily's confidence grew with each point she made. The audience, who had once looked at her with skepticism, was now taking note of her legal acumen. Some of the older attorneys who had been quietly watching her nodded in approval. They could see it now. Lily Turner wasn't just a girl trying to make a name for herself. She was a determined young woman who had worked tirelessly to learn the intricacies of the law, and she was proving that she deserved to be here. Judge King, who had been leaning back in his chair, now straightened up. His demeanor had shifted from condescension to respect. He regarded Lily with a more measured gaze, clearly taking in her words more seriously than before. Well, Miss Turner, he said, his voice now more neutral. I have to admit, your arguments are certainly more substantial than I initially gave you credit for. You've certainly caught my attention. Let's see how the rest of your presentation unfolds. Lily felt a surge of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had turned the tide. She wasn't just the teenage girl everyone had written off. She was a legal force to be reckoned with. As she resumed her presentation, her confidence soared. She continued to dismantle the prosecution's case, step by step, providing irrefutable evidence and legal precedents that not only proved Mr. Johnson's innocence, but also cast doubt on the integrity of the entire case. With each new point, Lily could see the courtroom's perception of her change. From a naive teen, she was becoming a formidable legal mind in their eyes. And as the court session drew to a close, Judge King's parting words carried a tone of respect that Lily had never expected. I look forward to hearing more from you, Miss Turner, he said, his voice devoid of mockery. Lily gave a small nod, feeling both exhaustion and triumph fill her chest. She had made her mark. The courtroom had seen her for what she was, a sharp, capable, and confident young woman, ready to fight for justice. As she sat down, the weight of the last hour lifted off her shoulders. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in this trial, Lily Turner felt like she had the upper hand. and she would not stop fighting until the truth was revealed. Lily Turner had spent the last year of her life preparing for this moment. Every day, every hour, every minute had been dedicated to understanding the law, not just in theory but in practice. She had faced mockery, dismissal, and disbelief at every turn. But now, as she stood in the courtroom, poised and confident, she was about to reveal something that would change everything. The tension in the air was palpable as Lily continued to present her case. The documents she had carefully prepared lay before her, and she methodically began pointing out the discrepancies in the prosecution's argument. With each piece of evidence she presented, the murmurs of the courtroom grew louder. Lily could sense the shift, but she wasn't finished yet. It was time for the truth to come to light. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Lily began, her voice steady, "I've spent the last year meticulously researching and analyzing every detail of this case. It wasn't just the textbooks I studied. It was the real-world context. I've examined every document, every email, and every financial record associated with this case. And what I found was shocking." Judge King, who had once belittled her, sat up straighter in his chair, his gaze fixed on Lily with a new level of attention. Olivia Stark, who had been so quick to mock her, now wore a frown of uncertainty. It was clear that Lily had their undivided attention. Lily took a deep breath, opening a file and holding up a document that was so carefully prepared it almost glimmered in the light of the courtroom. "This is the key piece of evidence," she continued. "An email exchange between Mr. Johnson's former employer and the fraudulent company that has falsely accused him of tax fraud. The company claims Mr. Johnson is guilty of embezzling funds, but when we look deeper, we see that the truth is far different." The courtroom fell silent as Lily carefully highlighted the names and timestamps in the email. She traced the details of the transactions, exposing how the fraudulent company had falsified financial records to make it appear as though Mr. Johnson had committed tax fraud. Lily's voice was calm but filled with conviction as she presented the evidence that could undo everything the prosecution had built. Judge King leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. His initial mockery had faded, replaced by a deep interest. Olivia Stark, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. She stood motionless, her arms crossed in a defensive posture, but the confidence she had once displayed was now gone. "I've also uncovered several financial transactions," Lily continued, "showing that the company, rather than Mr. Johnson, was responsible for the missing funds. They used Mr. Johnson as a scapegoat, manipulating financial reports and laundering money through false accounts. All of this was done to cover their tracks and protect the fraudulent activities of the company." Lily paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. The entire courtroom was watching her now. No one was laughing. No one was mocking. The respect that had been denied to her earlier was beginning to take root. "I also have statements from former employees of the company," Lily added, pulling out another set of documents. "These individuals, who have come forward anonymously, have confirmed that they were pressured by higher-ups to falsify records and cover up the company's illegal actions. They feared for their jobs and, in some cases, their lives." She placed the stack of statements on the desk, her fingers brushing over the edges before locking eyes with Judge King. "This isn't just about Mr. Johnson. It's about a larger pattern of corruption and fraud within this company, and I believe it's time the truth came out." The courtroom erupted in hushed whispers. For the first time since the trial began, Lily could see the shift in the room. It was no longer just her speaking into the void. Her words had weight. The people in the room, including Judge King, were beginning to realize that this wasn't just a young girl who had stumbled into a courtroom. This was a determined, intelligent woman who had studied tirelessly to uncover the truth. Judge King sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Olivia Stark, on the other hand, was visibly rattled. She glanced at the documents on the table, her mind racing as she tried to find a way to counter Lily's findings. "You," Judge King began, his voice low and measured, "you've done this research yourself, all of this. No assistance from anyone else." Lily nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor. Every piece of this case, every document, every piece of evidence, I uncovered it myself. This wasn't just a one-time project for me. I've dedicated myself to understanding the law and fighting for justice. And Mr. Johnson deserves the truth to come to light." The words hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time in the trial, Lily could feel a shift in the power dynamics. She had gone from being the target of mockery to commanding the courtroom's full attention. The judge, who had once dismissed her, was now looking at her with something akin to respect. Olivia Stark, the once confident prosecutor, was silent, her usual arrogance nowhere to be found. "You've done your homework, Miss Turner," Judge King said, his voice more neutral now than it had been before. "I must admit, I underestimated you." Lily felt a small surge of pride but quickly tempered it. She wasn't here for praise. She was here to win this case and expose the truth. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said simply, not allowing her emotions to interfere with her focus. The atmosphere in the courtroom had completely shifted. Where there had been mockery, now there was respect. Where there had been disbelief, now there was understanding. Lily wasn't just a teenager playing at being a lawyer, she was a lawyer in every sense of the word. Olivia Stark, still trying to compose herself, stood up. This is impossible," she muttered under her breath, clearly rattled by the revelations that Lily had uncovered. She turned to the judge, her voice filled with a sense of desperation. "Your Honor, we cannot ignore the fact that the evidence has been obtained through illegal means. These documents cannot be trusted." Lily shook her head. "These documents are authentic, Miss Stark. You can try to discredit them, but the truth is out, and I will make sure it comes to light, no matter what." Judge King gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We'll take a short recess to allow time for both sides to consider the new evidence presented. Miss Turner, you've made your case. We will reconvene shortly." As the gavel came down, Lily exhaled deeply. She had done it. She had uncovered the truth and proven herself in the face of doubt, and while the case wasn't over, she knew that the hardest part was behind her. The courtroom had seen her abilities, and now they would be forced to reckon with them. The shift in the room was palpable. Lily Turner had earned the respect she had been denied, and no one in that courtroom would ever again doubt her abilities. The final moments of the trial were a whirlwind of emotions for Lily Turner. She had spent the past few days walking a tightrope, balancing the weight of her client's fate with the overwhelming pressure of the courtroom. But as she stood now, at the apex of the trial, she felt a sense of quiet determination wash over her. The battle was almost over, and she had fought with everything she had, against not only the prosecution, but also against the preconceived notions of her youth and inexperience. Judge Joseph King and Olivia Stark had mocked her relentlessly in the beginning, treating her as little more than a naive teenager playing at something she could never understand. But now, it was different. The courtroom was silent as Lily took her place one last time in front of the judge, the jury, and her client, Mr. Johnson. Her voice steady, Lily addressed the court one final time. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence is clear. Mr. Johnson has been unjustly accused by a fraudulent company that sought to exploit him for their own gain. I have shown you the proof, and I have demonstrated the lies they used to manipulate the truth. Mr. Johnson is innocent, and he deserves his day in the light, free of the accusations that have clouded his life for far too long." The silence in the room was thick with anticipation. Even Judge King, who had spent the majority of the trial dismissing her, now looked at her with a newfound respect. "Olivia Stark, her once sure demeanor shattered, remained seated, her hands clenched in frustration as she stared down at the documents Lily had uncovered. The jury members exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. The evidence Lily had presented was irrefutable. The fraudulent company had been caught in their own lies, their attempts to frame Mr. Johnson exposed for the world to see. It was a victory for justice, for truth, and for the quiet strength of a young woman who had refused to back down. Judge King, who had once ridiculed her, stood up, his gavel raised high. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, after careful consideration of the evidence presented by Miss Turner, it is clear that Mr. Johnson has been wrongfully accused. The charges against him are hereby dismissed. He is found not guilty of all charges. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Lily's heart raced, her mind struggling to process the victory. She had done it. She had won. She had proven herself in the face of doubt, ridicule, and mockery. Mr. Johnson, her client, had been exonerated, and the fraudulent company that had sought to ruin him was now exposed for its crimes. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of murmurs, disbelief, and quiet applause. But Lily hardly heard it. She was too focused on the man who had trusted her when no one else did. Mr. Johnson stood beside her, his face a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Turner," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to express what this means to me." Lily smiled softly, the exhaustion of the trial settling into her bones. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Johnson. I just did my job. You deserve the truth." As the courtroom continued to buzz with activity, Lily's eyes shifted to Judge King and Olivia Stark. They were standing at the front of the room, their once confident postures now deflated. Judge King, looking older than usual, cleared his throat and turned to face Lily. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice subdued, "I must admit, I greatly underestimated you. Your knowledge of the law, your perseverance, and your determination have all proven that I was wrong. I apologize for doubting your abilities." Lily nodded, her pride tempered by a quiet humility. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your words." Olivia Stark, whose earlier arrogance had been shattered by Lily's sharp mind and unrelenting commitment to justice, stood beside the judge, her expression tight with frustration. It was clear that she had been defeated, her usual sharp tongue silenced by the overwhelming weight of the truth. "You've proven yourself, Miss Turner," Stark said, her voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "You've shown that age and inexperience mean nothing when it comes to doing what's right. You've earned this victory." Lily's smile was faint, but it was filled with an immense sense of accomplishment. She had fought for justice, and had not only won the case for Mr. Johnson, but had also proven a point that would resonate far beyond the walls of this courtroom. That determination, knowledge, and a commitment to truth could overcome any obstacle, no matter how formidable. As the trial concluded and the courtroom began to empty, Lily stood alone for a moment, allowing the magnitude of the victory to sink in. The journey had been long and the road had been filled with obstacles. But in the end, it was all worth it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Lily pulled it out to see a message from her best friend, Sarah. The text was simple but filled with the excitement and pride they both shared. "You did it, Lily. The world is going to know your name now." Lily's heart swelled with emotion. The road ahead would still be difficult. She knew that her victory today was just the beginning, but it was a start, one that would change her life and perhaps even the world in ways she hadn't yet imagined. "Yeah," she whispered to herself, a smile creeping onto her lips. "I did it." The victory wasn't just hers. It was the triumph of anyone who had ever been underestimated, of anyone who had ever been told they couldn't achieve greatness because of their age, their appearance, or their circumstances. Lily Turner had proven, once and for all, that with determination, courage, and a willingness to fight for what's right, anyone could overcome the odds. And this was just the beginning.